Hello, everyone. Wanted to check in for week 4 or module 4, depending how we're referring to it. Ways of dying. This week's or modules materials are unusual insofar as they're all scenes from films, from movies, and they're all death scenes from movies. This is pretty much explained in the instructor video for the module why I chose them and what I'm trying to get at. But I would really ask you to watch these closely, to treat them as readings, to study them, and if there's one that you do feel particularly is a helpful or revelatory depiction of dying, then to watch it repeatedly. Again, there's no reason for me to comment on the individual scenes. I do that in the instructor video. If we look at the essay assignment, this pesky word truth comes up again. I thought I'd, comment once again on maybe perhaps my rather loose use of the word truth. But the Module 4 essay asks, which of the 3 death scenes do you think gets closest to the truth about death? Why? So obviously it's a 2-part question. And the why is the substance of your essay, is giving obviously an interpretation, an account of the scene, and then giving your reasons why you think that this particular scene, as opposed to the others, reveals something of the truth about death. And again, if it is always a good question to think about what we mean by truth, especially in a philosophy class. But I would refer you to the video I sent out for Module 3, the Module 3 essay assignment, for some clarification of what I have in mind and the ambiguities and complexities of asking about the truth of a particular philosophical or dramatic depiction of death. Now, of course, one of the things we have to keep in mind is, I think, something always good to keep in mind in a philosophy class about death is Epicurus. The Epicurus view of death, the Epicurean view of death, forces us to make a distinction between dying and death, because I think by Epicurus' own principles, to say that dying is nothing to us is simply not true. Death is nothing to us, because death is nothing. Death is simply a termination, an ending of life. It doesn't entail any experiences whatsoever, so we can pretty much say nothing about it. But dying is an experience within life, and that's what is depicted here is dying. So when I ask you which of these scenes gets to the closest to the truth about death, it may be from an Epicurean point of view that none of them do, because there's nothing to say about death, and they're not really depicting death, they're depicting the dying process. I would ask you to perhaps think of it more loosely than that. That is, this distinction between dying and death. But keep it in mind. One of the steps, let's say in the logical course, was last week in Module 3, when Landsberg and Heidegger certainly had some notion of what death means to us while we're alive. That is, we are mortal creatures, insofar as we will someday die, and we are aware of the fact. And I think thinkers like Landsberg and Heidegger were interested in how that condition and that knowledge affected the way that we lived and the way that we thought about our own existence here and now. So when I say when I ask you to what degree you think these scenes reveal the truth about death, I suppose what I mean is to what extent they reveal the truth of death as it exists in our consciousness, that is, as a fact of human life, of our mortality. I mean, it's quite clear that I would say the big contrast in the scenes, and this is breaking what I said before about saying particular things about the scenes, the big contrast is between the scene of the man who is basically committing assisted suicide in the barbarian invasions, and the scene in which Jason Robards in Magnolia is talking about the regret of how he lived his life. Um, I have nothing more to say except that it's a good thing to explore that contrast. How we approach death makes us think about life, and the reflection of our lives in the way that we approach death is an interesting subject. So, I guess my question here about which of these reveals the truth about death is which do you think is the most honest depiction of dying? Is it the very sort of loving, peaceful sort of thing that is depicted in the barbarian invasions? Is it the traumatic and tragic reflection on life that's depicted in Magnolia? And there is the third one there, the very dramatic and theatrical ending that this man who is a show business man, a choreographer and director, it's really an autobiographical sort of thing about Bob Fosse, the director and choreographer. Is it rather the big send-off sort of that he imagines for himself, with some, very stark contrast there in the very ending of that, which you have to watch when the body bag gets zipped up. But so don't really get bogged down, I think, in what are quite legitimate questions about truth here. We could approach this that, which one of these scenes reveals the truth of life, death or dying, or mortality being a part of life. So, yeah, that's pretty much what it had in mind. So, yeah, it is a different sort of module in that I'm asking you to critically interpret scenes from films rather than read texts. The only other thing I want to mention, if you've gotten to the end of this essay, is, and I would say that most anybody who's gotten to the end of this video, is probably not missing any work, but I do see people who have missed assignments. I just want to reinforce that, except for discussion posts, all assignments for this class can be turned in late for partial credit.